Six is back. I'm Miguel Dorati, and that's Anthony Scott Piatt. Obviously, the big fight this weekend, Jermell Charlo versus Canelo Alvarez. And we're going to take a look at what action we've got going on for this weekend. And we're also going to recap. We've been off for about a month. We're going to recap the Usyk Dubois weekend of fights, which was the last time we were out in public, so to speak. And, we did pretty good, so I'm going to let ASP take you through that. And then we'll get into this Charlo-Canelo Chapter 1.
Looking forward to that. We also have a dog watch between Ugas and Barrios that we're going to break down very thoroughly for you. But let's go back to the last show that we did. We hit very nicely that night. We hit almost everything. Fraser Clark for the knockout at -110 and to win in round 5 and 6. We did the 2-leg parlay. We put $100 on the over 6.5 for the Usyk Dubois fight, and Jared Big Baby Anderson to win by knockout or TKO. 100 on that one is 190 back. All of these won. Daniel Dubois to be knocked down 2 times at +270. 2 knockdowns in the fight, of course. Alexander Usyk to win in round 8 to start. Nice $50 into 102. Alexander Usyk to win in rounds 7 through 9, paid +280. Alexander Usyk to win in rounds 7 through 12, paid +190. Pretty much everything we bet hit. It was one of those nights where you 5 and 6 times the money you put in was coming back out at you. It was a great night. and we're continuing that. Let's keep it going. But we haven't there just hasn't been much for about a month, Miguel. It's been really slow in boxing. So I'm glad to be back with this Canelo fight. Having said that, really only a couple that I liked on this. There was 9 or 10 fights, a couple that I would suggest staying away from. So we didn't do an 8-leg lock, but we've got this dog watch that you and I were talking about a little bit off air, and I think we need to walk people through this fight. I think this is a sleeper fight, and I think I know why the money is going the way it is and why we should buck the trend. So look, it's Mario Barrios versus Yordenis Ugas. Barrios at 29 years of age. Let's start with the one thing that's the elephant in the room when you talk about Cuban fighters. When you look up BoxRec, Ugas does not have an age listed. So that put up a little, I wonder what the controversy is. Okay, he's Cuban. We know these things happen. I can find him listed on the web at 37 years of age, born July 14th, 1986. So, Miguel, explain a little bit about how this has happened. It's something we've talked about before, but of what happens in the amateur system in Cuba and why Yordenis Ugas is 37 years of age or older.
Yeah, there's a constant controversy with the wave of Cubans that we saw coming out, in the 2000s. You had Rigondeaux and there were several of them. Oleander, there's a heavyweight too. There was always questions about their age, and because these guys get sucked up into the amateur system in Cuba.
And still now, the Ortiz, Frank Sanchez, if I'm, at any rate, there's plenty, and there have been plenty examples like that. Heavyweight on down to lightweight.
And there's always the thought, so the kids get put into the amateur system very early, and when they show talent, then they become managed by, the government has a plan going there, which leads to, all these gold medals and Olympians and that sort of stuff. And it's, the guys that make the elite there are taken care of in the system. Now, this system may be changing over the last, 10 or so years, but this guy's still susceptible to having been, put in as a 15-year-old that say, hey, he's 13. And you got to carry that lie forward forever,
And that's how they do well in amateur and world champion, maybe even Olympics and whatnot. Cubans perform really well.
Yeah, by the time they get to be men, it's almost a disadvantage because people start saying, "Oh, they're older and they look older than they are," and stuff like that. I think it's an advantage that plays out early in his career, but they're susceptible to it when they're talented. And Ugas, you know, what I remember about Ugas too is that he had a run already as a pro. And the Cubans fight beyond their expiration date, so to speak. They almost all do, because they really don't have preparation to move into another field or anything like that. This is what they do.
That's right.
So when you examine that early run he had in his career, where he surprised some people, I think it was that he was a guy with a couple of blemishes on his record. People didn't take him totally seriously, and he came in very serious and won a few fights. In retrospect, though, he didn't beat any world killers either.
You're right. You look back on that, some of the names you look at the time were up-and-coming names. And so I think Ugas, by beating them, elevated his star a little bit. Guys like Thomas Delorme, followed, that was 2017, followed by Ray Robinson. Guys that in retrospect didn't go on to do a whole lot. You mentioned another name, Bryant Perella maybe. But if you look back, his resume is less impressive. Ugas's resume is a little less impressive in retrospect than it was at the time, which is kind of weird. Sometimes the cumulative effect, you look back, oh man, a lot of guys went on to do some stuff that he beat early on. And you're a little more impressed a lot of times. Here I'm a little less impressed. And this is not bash Ugas or Cubans. I want to be clear. The Cuban system is putting these boys at an early advantage and a late disadvantage. It's not because they're Cuban. It's because the system is screwing them. But if you do look at 2012, Ugas lost to Johnny Garcia in a split decision. He's fighting guys with not great records up until Johnny Garcia, by the way, the first undefeated fighter he ever fought. Minus Dwayne Jackson, the second fighter at 1-0. But so his first undefeated fighter gets the split decision. He then fights not great fighters again for a while. Comes back to fight undefeated fighters. His first one, Emmanuel Robles, loses a split decision. This 2014. Also in 2014, Amir Ahmed Ayman, 13-0. He loses a unanimous decision. So everybody he fought, his first three undefeated fighters, save for the second guy at 1-0, beat him. Is that a mental thing? I don't know. He goes on 2016, Jamal James at 20-0, and finally gets his unanimous decision. 96-94 by one judge. So who knows? But that's early Ugas, back in 14, 15, and 16. Going forward, he beats guys that help his stock, as we mentioned, Thomas Delorme, Ray Robinson moving forward. He then loses to Sean Porter, a split decision. The split decision helps him get a couple more fights, Figueroa and whatnot. Next, he finally beats Manny Pacquiao in that unanimous decision. 115, 113, 116, 112. He beat Manny. Okay, great. He loses to Errol Spence the very next fight. So looking back, if you look at all that, he's had trouble with the better fighters as he steps up. He's now 37 or older. Mario Barrios, on the other hand, with a couple of losses, he's fighting pretty tough guys as far back as 2015. He's already fighting good competition, decent guys, decent records with a lot of fights. He loses to Gervonta Davis in 2021. On the cards, he's 96-92 on two of the judges. That's with the knockdown in the 8th, which is 2 points, and the TKO in the 11th. There's 4 points right there. Without that, he's tied. Now, that's not a knock on Davis. We know he's going to use his power and he's going to fight his fight. But the point is, Barrios seems to be able to hang with a guy like that. Ugas doesn't have that sort of power. It took Davis till the 11th. He lost to Keith Thurman. I really value Keith Thurman's footwork in that unanimous decision. That's 2 in a row. Barrios has come back and won a fight against Giovanni Santiago and is now ready for Ugas. I just feel like this is at least a 50-50 fight, is how I'm looking at this. And with plus 210 for Barrios, Look, if we can flip a coin and I think it's 50-50, and on one side, the $100 that I put up, you're going to give me $30 back because Ugas is a minus 400. But $50 for the clip, the other side is going to give me $150 back at that plus 210. Well, I'm sorry, if we put 100, we're going to add 210. So we're going to get $310 back. We happen to bet 50, so that's why my math was off on that. So we'll put the shot up on this where we put the 50 on the 210. And so again, I think this is close enough to a 50-50 fight that I'm hoping Barrios' youth and hunger pulls out the win. Where am I right? Where am I wrong, Miguel? Tell the folks what they need to know from your perspective. A lot of times we agree, sometimes we disagree. And I'm always more happy when we agree because, about 30% of the time we disagree, you're right.
I appreciate that, but I feel like you're pretty spot on here. At the end of the day, I think like the Cubans also have that, they fight beyond their date and stuff like that, and they kind of are forced to fight, when they get older and things. And that does take a little bit of the hunger out of you as well. Ugas has been doing this for a long, long time. And Barrios has reason to be hungrier here. He still has, some upside to his career. He's got to look at it like, he has a shot at some big fights. The one flag I would raise for Barrios is that I don't know that we know enough about him as a welter. He's doing what, to me, Barrios was always a good fighter, a talented fighter. But one of the cream of the crop lightweights that was out there was a guy named Mikey Garcia, and he ruined his career jumping 2 weight classes to welter, and that's exactly what Barrios is trying to do.
And never really could go back either. You're right about that, and that's a flag. That's a flag.
He lost to Thurman. Yep, it is. He lost to Thurman in his first outing at welter. Thurman is a classy welterweight, so really no harm. That's your first. They didn't take that fight coming off the Gervonta Davis loss thinking they were going to lose. So, Thurman proved himself to be a little bit better fighter. Since then, he's actually 1-1 as a welterweight, and Ugas is pretty rugged. The one thing you can count on Ugas is almost like Evander Holyfield in terms of just come forward and attack when he's at his best. And
you're right. He doesn't have the footwork of a Thurman to be elusive, but he'll get in your face and continue to move forward. And so it depends on how he handles that.
Yep, and Barrios has 18 KOs, and he got a KO in his last fight at welter, a TKO. But if Ugas finds himself not really bothered by his power, that could be.
He'll keep coming forward. I think that holds some value. I think the reason the numbers maybe don't reflect what you and I would set him at, and I'm not saying Barrios might not be the underdog, but I might have him at a plus 125 or a plus 150, not a plus 210, being the point here. I think part of that reason is because folks that have looked back and he's lost 2 of 3, and he's lost to Davis and Thurman. Some folks don't rate Thurman as highly as I do. Now, I know Thurman's style is what allows him to beat certain guys. He's different and he brings a certain look. So maybe I don't hold that Thurman loss against Barrios as hard as some of the bettors would. What I'm getting at is when some folks are going to this, I think it's an easy pick to go with Ugas. I think people are throwing him in some of their parlays. I think they're betting him outright. And I think that skewed the math a little bit on like a FanDuel or a DraftKings from what I think should be a plus, as I say, plus 125, plus 150 for Barrios is now plus 210. And because I think it's basically a 50-50 fight again, those odds are just paying too well. So if we can take a plus 200 every time we think something's 50-50, what that does is we don't have to hit 50% of the time because we're being paid 200 instead of 100. So anything above 200, if you really believe it's a 50-50, folks, is a winning proposition because you're going to hit every other time and you get paid more than double every time you hit. So at a plus 210, what I think is a 50-50 fight has to be bet. So this is a dog watch instead of a dog pick. I'm not necessarily picking Barrios. I'm saying he could easily win, and the math is on our side. So let's go for it.
Yeah, no, I think it makes it fun to watch.
Right. Yep. So, and the big one, folks, Alvarez versus Charlo. Not the Charlo we would have bet on, expecting to see maybe a year ago, as Jermell has leapfrogged Jermall in weight classes and gone up a couple. Now he's a little taller than Alvarez. Is there any fear from your position that Charlo doing this is saying similar to, as you mentioned, Mikey Garcia, Mario Barrios? Is he moving up, and will he be able to go back down below his brother's weight class again? And does he give a shit anymore? Because he's saying, I'm not my brother. My brother's got to get his stuff together. You know, his brother just got slapped by Caleb Plant twice, one of which was on video. He's had a lot of issues. We won't get into so much of the personal stuff, but that stuff has kept him from defending his belt for, I think, over 2 years now. There's a deeper discussion we can have about sanctioning bodies and their willingness to let people sit on belts. I'm not always against it. But at any rate, with all that drama going on between the brothers and Canelo and whatnot, this is the fight we get. It's not a bad fight. I'm leaning towards Canelo. I believe money line. We don't have a one to show you just yet because I haven't placed my bet on this. Partially because I want to hear what everyone else wants to hear here too. Is from Miguel. You know, we talked about this in the Ryder fight. Ryder's a different beast, of course. He engages differently and he's more defensive. But has Canelo lost stamina? Has he lost power? Just enough? Just a little bit of a snap? Or was that Ryder himself? Where are we on this fight? I think Canelo pulls it off. I lean towards money line. But knockout is like plus 250 maybe. You know, I'm going to look it up while you give me your thoughts. We've analyzed Canelo a lot over the past couple of years, Miguel, and I think you've been on track. I think what you have said about his last couple of fights and what to expect in those fights, you called that Ryder fight perfectly, as a matter of fact. I remember that. So give it to us. Don't hold out, please.
Some of it is circumstantial evidence on Canelo, but look, he did fight number 60-something for him on the record. You know, so he's been fighting for a long time. We've known about Canelo for so long when he was, the baby face coming up, and, he's been on top for so long that you remember him being, in the conversation for the top draw in the world and stuff like that when he was 26, 27, that age, he was already there. So now he's 33. And the problem for me in this is that Jermell Charlo is just another fight for him. They all start to look the same, be the same. He's going to bank another $30 million, and if there really isn't that much splitting hairs. Whereas for Charlo, I'm not sure him and his brother haven't had some orchestration of their careers together for a long time. They have. And yeah. His brother, I think, fought Tony Harrison, who beat. They go back and forth. They feel each other out. They look at each other, and I think it's logical that Jermell is the first guy to get a crack at Canelo because he does have a loss, and if Canelo beats him, then you bring in the undefeated brother kind of thing. But they do like to also show some independence to the press and stuff. Like you said, my brother's got to get his stuff together with all the personal problems. Yeah, this is this guy's biggest chance. This is the biggest.
Yeah, and it's a catapult
in his boxing career. And
if he wins this fight,
talking about Canelo and the Charlo, a mix of the Charlos for half a decade. Mm-hmm. So when you're sitting there going through and Charlo also has that Canelo effect where the guys he's been fighting on that roster, You know, he avenged his win against Tony Harrison. There's nothing there that was going to take him to the stratosphere like a Canelo fight would do. So this
Well,
is the
and you
one
can make the argument that his value, his stock is going to rise, win or lose, if he can show a decent. Caleb Plant did not get hurt by losing to Canelo Alvarez. We saw a guy in there having fun and competing, and if a guy can compete well against Canelo, he might be able to beat a lot of other guys, and he's going to be a draw. And how many people have seen the guy now? But because Canelo draws the eyes, right? So now you've got more people that know you as well, and as long as you don't look like a bum, you know, come out and give it your all. Charlo stands to do well in this regardless. But if he wins, woohoo! Look out, right? I mean, it shakes up the whole industry.
And the contrast there is the motivation. Charlo should come in like this is the biggest fight of his career, whereas Canelo is just the slog of another fight. Especially if you consider the undefeated brothers there, who's a little bit bigger, operates, you know, at middleweight, a little closer. That's a fight that the odds will be closer on when Canelo takes it. So this is really just another fight for Canelo. That may have been part of what happened to him with Ryder. You know, that for Ryder is the opportunity of a lifetime. You're right in these terms too, and this will apply to Charlo. Even if he loses, even if he gets mauled in the first round, it's still such a big payday compared to what he usually makes that he's going to feel like, yeah, you know, I'd do that again for the money, you know. So
Spence comes to mind.
Take that disaster out of it, and he does well. Yeah, there's a lot of upside to it, but nothing like beating Canelo. And Charlo's talented. The brothers have always been talented. So let's see if he can get his boxing match. He's not overwhelmed by finally getting to this point or this stage. Because Canelo's, like I said, Canelo's not overwhelmed. Canelo's not. It's just another fight.
Yeah, it's an interesting way to look at it, and you're absolutely right. It has to be to an extent that Charlo absolutely set everything aside, the feud with his brother, any promoter bullshit, and go in there and give us the show, give us the best show he can, and try and win the damn thing. And Canelo has to be somewhere in his mind looking on to the next as well. It's probably inevitable that's happening a little bit. So interesting dynamic. The odds are not that crazy. I just sent them to you. I was right about the 250 or close. It's plus 260 for Alvarez by knockout, 125 by decision. Charlo on points plus 550, and by knockout plus 950. Okay, so and that straight up money line is minus 480 for Alvarez, plus 330 for Charlo. Again, we took Barrios at plus 210, and if for some reason you thought this was a 50-50 fight, then Jermell Charlo at plus 330 is plus 130 over our threshold, right? So if we say something's a 50-50 fight, it's got to be a plus 200 to pick a guy to take the underdog. Anything over that plus 200 is expected profit, given that we're going to hit every other time. So yeah, plus 330 if you really think this is a 50-50. I don't think Miguel does. Even with the hesitance that you're bringing up about him being blasé or perhaps not taking it seriously enough, and Charlo being really hype, give us your percentage there with that said, Miguel.
Canelo is at the top of the game in terms of income, and you don't want to take a significant hit either. So he's got a reason, to be motivated. And I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying that there is a repetitiveness to the, being favored in fights all the time and things like that, that you kind of could be susceptible to blasé. But I think Canelo's a pro. Canelo will come out and try to get the job done. It's Charlo that has to rise to the occasion here. And, again, looking over his resume, that PBC roster had a nice, good level of fighters, but there were no real, like, world beaters or killers on there either that, take you to the next level. The Charlos have been at the top of that roster for a little while. They avoid each other in weight classes and things like that. And, him and his brother have this competition where, they're trying to make a name for themselves, and besides the twins kind of thing. This is a perfect opportunity for him. Because his brother's the undefeated one that everybody thinks, you want to be a setup for your brother? Go ahead, lose this fight, and then Canelo grabs even more money to fight him, and his brother's going to want the fight because his brother's going to say, how much money did you get?
Right. Looking down the list, the first name that really pops out, Gabriel Rosado's on here. I mean, 21-7 at the time, but he's a bit of a name. Erickson Lubin, Austin Trout, yeah. Tony Harrison, but he lost. Tony Harrison revenge fight, of course.
Yeah, Harrison was a fight he shouldn't have. Ugas was a great victory for him at the time because Lubin. Lubin was a great victory for him at the time because Lubin was undefeated, and he was a guy that was young and he had a backstory where he had avoided going to the Olympics. A lot of people thought he'd have medaled at least in the Olympics of that level of talent, and he went pro, had a backstory. I felt like heading into that fight, the PBC had their eggs in Lubin's basket, and Charlo ruined that. That's probably his first victory best victory because he ruined Lubin.
Right? No, I agree on that. I think you're right. I think you're right calling that. Now, the trouble is when you go back and look sort of like a Ugas's resume, there are a couple of good ones on there that you point out, but Harrison beats him, and then he has to come back and revenge it. Then he beats Jason Rosario, nothing to note. And he's coming off, right before this Alvarez fight, he's coming off of 2 Brian Carlos Castano fights because the first one was a split draw, 12-round split draw. Very strange scorecards. Tim Cheatham had him 114-114 for the draw. Nelson Vasquez 117-111. Steve Weisfeld 113-114. So a wide card from one guy, very tight from another, and as tight as you can get from Tim Cheatham, who, when you see these strange cards, you think, he may be that lawyer the Three Stooges used to talk about from the law form of Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe. But he came back and beat Castano with the knockout, last year. So middle of the year last year, beat Castano, knockout. So, but he's had to have 2 revenge fights in his last 6 fights. His last 4 fights, 2 of them have been revenge fights. You see what I'm saying? Of his last 4 fights. So, I mean, he's not a giant killer by any means. He's a good fighter.
We're going to find out about him. And this weekend, especially when he was coming up, they were talking about, high top side and expectations and stuff. Yeah, they've been chilled a little bit in the last few years, but this is his chance. Like I said, you don't want to be a doorstep for your brother. If you can avoid it, that's my read on their rivalry. He got the first chance. Don't let it be a situation where Canelo beats you and so Jermell has to step in with his record and the payday.
So what's your you got to either give us a plus 200 number. He's a plus 330. Do you think he should be a plus 200 instead of a 330? Do you think you know what I mean?
Plus 250 would be fair because Canelo at the end of the day really, doesn't lose. I mean, he doesn't lose. He lost to Mayweather when he was coming up, so that's fair. And then Bivol, going to light heavyweight was a test for this guy, and he failed it. And the problem with that is that with Bivol, he went up against a guy from another one of those amateur systems that really prepares you, similar to Usyk that we talked about earlier in this thing. He's that level of guy, except for he's, not a heavyweight, so people, Bivol didn't attract the attention, or he's not as flashy as Lomachenko or anything like that. But in terms of caliber, that's the level of guy that you're talking about.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
The Bivol fight, Bivol was like, you know, he's little. I beat a little guy. It's like he doesn't even respect it because Canelo's blown up at 176. That's not his weight.
Right, right. Well, there, folks, this is what I wanted to dig in and get out of Miguel for you, because this really goes a long way to understanding where the mindset of these guys are going into this. Remember, Miguel's cornered for guys, promoted, brought things together, and judged both MMA and boxing. So I love picking Miguel's brain and appreciate what we get out of that. So keep watching, subscribe, tell everybody, because we are bringing some serious background and knowledge and history with the historian Miguel Iterati. I see your head getting a little big there, kind of, but no, it's well deserved, my man. I always appreciate what you bring to the show. No, kidding aside, absolutely.
No, and I enjoy it. The truth is that you know, always impressed when you get on one of your runs. We've been down. You know, we took a loss, and then we haven't really had an 8-fight parlay in a while, which was going to be our bread and butter. I hope to see those come back so that people can see you at your flexing, because week in, week out, you start to get like, this mother, he's going to do it again, you know? And that makes it fun. And until we're back to that, I think we got, you know, some big fights coming up in MMA and in boxing. Obviously, we've got Ngannou and Fury in October, about 3 weeks away. And, you know, got John
We need
Jones.
some cards. What I'm afraid, this is a bit of a side note, but what sometimes happens, and you can probably see this happen as well, but what sometimes happens, we get, when boxing's really going and we've got a pretty good fight on a card and they have a good undercard, and then we get 2 or 3 cards on a Saturday. So we have one in England and we have, you know, a couple here or whatnot. Spread them out. And they're decent cards, right? So then what happens is, if you get a blockbuster card, and to some extent it's happening this weekend, when you get a blockbuster card and they put so much money into that main fight, you know, unlike the English cards, which sometimes I watch those on DAZN and they'll take like 3-4 hours. Other guys are complaining. I'm like, I love it. I'm spending my Saturday afternoon watching boxing. I get to see, you know, 12 fights and they take forever. I love it, you know, because there's a lot to bet on, and I love betting on those undercards. But when you spend a lot of money on a big fight like that, they may only have 3 or 4 undercard fights, and they may not be available to bet on a FanDuel or a DraftKings, because they're putting so much money into some of the pay-per-views. So when we can really get into our 8-leg locks, is that sweet spot that, you know, seems to happen sort of April, May, June, July. And then, you see what I'm getting at, though. We need it when there's a lot of boxing on that are good cards, but not great cards. Because we want great cards. We don't want great main events necessarily, because the big main events mean very little undercard.
Yeah,
so that's where we're at.
I have very low expectations for that Fury and Ngannou card.
Right.
You know, the other
right.
So
it'll be shit. Yeah, it's going to be shit, and you know, it just is.
In the UFC, you've got the 155-pound rematch between Oliveira and Makhachev. We'll see if Oliveira has closed the gap a little bit. Makhachev has sort of been on the fence, or rather on the shelf, for a little while, and has been healthy, so he should be chomping at the bit. We'll see what that one comes up. And then November 11, you've got John Jones returning in Madison Square Garden. So
big fight.
Huge. Yeah.
Big fight.
So